What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Cross Country Bank Angler. It is the middle of winter right now in my area. You might be able to tell or not, but there's snow on the ground out here. I actually don't get snow very often around my area, but we've gotten two decent sized snows in the last week. You know, in the winter, I tend to not fish as often, especially when it's really cold like this. You know, we've been in like the 30s. Today's video is going to be all about how to get started with bait finesse system fishing. We've got some baits, we've got some rods and reels, and we're going to talk about them. Hopefully I can give you guys a little bit of a starter guide on how to kind of get into BFS. For me, it's really made fishing more enjoyable. So this video is going to be kind of my top 5 tips for beginners in BFS. Alright, so the first tip, the first point I want to kind of touch on here is, you know, what is BFS fishing, and you know, who could really stand to kind of benefit from using this type of gear? You know, what are the situations where it's going to work best, and does this really apply to you? This finesse system is basically light and ultralight fishing with bait casting equipment. Specifically, this was developed in Japan several decades ago, kind of independently by both bass fishermen and also trout fishermen. You know, kind of the traditional methods of fishing with this type of gear is, you know, finesse fishing for bass, or kind of like wave fishing, small mountain streams for trout. But you know, obviously the applications can expand beyond that, but that is kind of the typical way to go. You know, for me, I'm a multi-species angler. And you know, a few years ago I learned how to fish with a bait caster, and I came to enjoy it more than spinning. So, but you know, I'm an ultralight fisherman, and I wanted to be able to kind of have the feel and efficiency of a bait caster while still being able to cast those light baits. So this was kind of a no-brainer for me to kind of try out. If that kind of applies to you, you know, if you see yourself, you know, fishing smaller bodies of water a lot, where the forage is smaller and you're using smaller baits a lot, and you're relatively experienced with a bait caster, fishing with a bait caster, then this gear, this equipment, this technique could be for you. I really think it's not a very beginner-friendly style of fishing. You know, it's a bit more technical. You know, the casts that you're making and the gear that you're using is very important. And I think you should at least, you know, understand and be familiar with the traditional bait casting outfit first. You know, like a bass fishing, you know, a medium heavy type of setup. If you like bait casters and you want to throw lighter lures, and you're fishing those smaller situations where you don't need a ton of line capacity, and you're throwing those smaller lures, then yeah, you should maybe give this a try. So the number 2 tip I want to kind of touch on here has to do with the costs of BFS and the gear. Because, you know, when I first kind of learned about this, I'm a pretty budget-minded fisherman for the most part. It was an expensive kind of specialist approach to fishing, and that kind of kept me from really trying it, because at that point it seemed like, you know, any kind of good performing gear you'd have to drop hundreds of dollars on, you know, in terms of rods and reels. Things are different now. So if you have an impression that bait finesse is, you know, if you're a budget guy and you think it's too expensive, I think that is really not so important anymore, because now you can get high quality rods and reels for a good price. You know, $50, even less in some cases, for reels and for rods. I don't use the ultra budget stuff really nowadays, but I think I can definitely get by with it. Don't let the cost discourage you. You can get a decent setup for you know, under $100, you can get a decent rod and reel. And getting into that, let's talk a little bit about the rods, you know, and the reels, the equipment itself, a little bit more. The reels, you know, what should you really look for in a reel? You know, how can you kind of identify something? You know, is it bait finesse or not? So in terms of the reels, these reels, they tend to have a very shallow spool, a very small spool. They tend to be on the more compact side, lighter weight. But the main thing you want to look for is that shallower spool. And you want to do some research, you know, get an idea of the specs on a reel before you make a purchase, because there are some reels that are out there that are just not worth the price because they're not designed correctly. You know, you really want, you know, an important aspect of these reels is going to be the weight of the spool. You want a lightweight, low inertia spool on your reels. So before you buy a reel, try to see if you can figure out the spool weight. And in my opinion, a spool that weighs more than like 9 grams is kind of, at this point, a little bit outdated for bait finesse. Anything heavier than that, you know, you're pushing how usable it can really be, and throwing those really small lures. So keep that in mind. This first one here, this is the first BFS reel that I bought. This is a Kastking Zephyr, and this reel I got it I think 2 or 3 years ago. And it was, like I said, the first serious BFS reel that I got, and you know, I had a pretty good time with this thing. You know, it got me into it, and you know, helped me kind of start my kind of BFS fascination without spending too much money. This reel is about, you know, if you buy it on like the U.S. market, it's about $70 or $75. At this point in 2025, I think there are better options that can be had for less money. I can throw those lighter lures better. This reel now, you know, if you wanted to pick it up, you know, I think it would be better for finesse fast techniques, you know, on like a light power or a medium light rod. Throwing some lower stuff like, you know, a Ned rig or something like that. But you know, any kind of downsize technique, you know, small swim baits, small spinner baits. I'd say the sweet spot for this reel is about like a 1/8 ounce, which is about 3.5 grams. It can throw lighter. I've cast it down to 1/16 on this with the right rod. But this is not going to be the best reel for like true small lure fishing. And really the one that I recommend for a beginner as a budget-friendly option is going to be this next one here. This is the Acura HIG 50 Pro. It's Soloking, I think is the company, or Doviello. The Soloking Acura HIG 50 Pro. This is a reel that has a pretty good following online right now, and I think it's for a very good reason. I think it performs well above price. You can get this reel on Amazon for over $60, but I think you can probably find it cheaper if you're willing to order it from overseas. It's got a lot of things going for it. It's very lightweight. It casts smaller baits really well. You know, it's got a good brake system on it. That's gonna, you know, it's a fairly free brake system. So keep that in mind. Maybe not. You know, you may want to have to use a little more brake with this reel than you might initially expect. Other advantages of this reel, you know, is one, the retrieve is just extremely smooth on this thing. It's extremely smooth for the price. I'm sure there are smooth reels out there, but for what you're paying for, the feel of it in terms of the smoothness is really nice and premium. And then also this reel comes in 2 different speeds. There's a 7/1-1 and an 8/1-1, so you can kind of get your more moderate speed. I have the 7/1, and it's probably one of my slower reels, but I still like the speed of it. And you can get that faster 8/1-1. But the other amazing thing about this reel reel is that it comes with two different spools. It comes with a, your traditional shallow BFS spool. It's a very lightweight spool. I think it's around 5.5 grams. And then it also comes with a like a medium capacity spool that's about a gram or so heavier. And that spool, it allows you to really, it just makes this reel way more versatile when you have that second spool, because you're able to kind of fish this thing with heavier line and more line, and maybe throw some of those slightly bigger lures a little bit further, a little bit more effectively when you need to, when you want to upsize a little bit. You're kind of getting some overlap into traditional bait casters with that other spool. But it just makes this reel super versatile. There's so many situations where you could use it. You could fish this reel with the deeper spool, just on like a regular medium or even a medium heavy rod if you wanted to. And it's so light, it's really comfortable to fish with because of that. I don't particularly like the knobs that come on it. It has these thin plastic knobs and a pretty small handle that come with it. So I did change out the knobs to some aftermarket ones. I got them on AliExpress for like 10 or 12 bucks, and they're kind of like imitation Shimano knobs. And I like them much more. They make the reel much more comfortable and premium feeling to fish with. But it is a great reel. You really can't go wrong. There's a reason it's popular. So that's probably my top recommendation for a beginner, is the Acura HIG 50 Pro. And then the final reel I want to touch on here is this round profile reel. This is the iFishband Tender Shoot. It came out a couple years ago. You can see it sits pretty high on the rod there. Not as pummable, obviously, because it's round, but I got it. I think the aesthetic of the round reels is cool. It looks kind of old-fashioned, kind of retro, and it's also a very solidly built, tough feeling reel. It's got a metal body, a little bit heavier than the others, but it's not overly heavy. It's like 7.5 ounces. Kind of more of like a typical bait caster reel weight, but it's fast. It's an 8.0-1, and it's got really nice high quality handle on it as well. And this is going to be a little bit more pricey. I think it was $140 when I picked it up, and I think the price is largely the same nowadays. But if you like that round profile reel and you don't want to spend a bunch of money on like the Shimano Conquest BFS, this is a great option. Let's talk rods. So this rod here, this is one that I bought a while ago, and I did have some trouble with it. It's a budget rod. I think it was about 70 bucks. You got it was a twin tip rod. This is the Kingdom King Pro, and it came with a light and an ultralight tip. And I broke both of the tips on this rod pretty quickly, unfortunately. So it's not quite as long as it used to be. But I just kind of, broke the rest of it off at this guide here, and still fishable. It's still, decently sensitive. Still casts well. It's got a faster action now because that tip broke off. But I don't know if this one, you can still get it. I got it off AliExpress. Yeah, like I said, about 70 bucks. This reel and this rod, this whole combo is gonna run around $140. It's not too bad. Sort of two directions in terms of the design of these rods. You can get kind of a really light trout style rod, which is typically very short. It's going to be 5 feet, 5 to 6 feet, or even shorter in some cases. And they tend to be glass, and they allow you to cast very accurately. But they're very flexible, very whippy, not super sensitive. But that's kind of the traditional stream fishing rod. I don't really have one exactly like that. The closest one I have to that style, in my opinion, is this, which is the Lurestar Sigama. But this is a fast action graphite rod, so it's not really going to have that level of flex. But it's nice and sensitive. It's nice, and this is what I like for kind of creeks, creek fishing, small ponds. It's a 6 foot long light power rod. It's rated from 2 to 7 grams, so up to like 1/4 of an ounce, which is about the heaviest I will go for BFS. But I like this rod for smaller waters. Nice and maneuverable, comfortable grip on it, easy to cast one-handed or backhanded. You know, whatever you need to do, you can do it with this little rod. It's just nice and maneuverable. But you can go the other direction too with more kind of bass style rods, and that's kind of what I would say this one is here. You can see it's got this long fork butt on it, so it's more of a traditional fighting butt that you get on a bait caster today. A typical bait caster, and you can tuck that in under your arm and use that kind of leverage to fight the fish with it. This is a Daiwa Crossfire CS. That's what this rod's called. It's on the Bait Finesse Empire. That's where I got it, so you can get it in the US, assuming it's still available. And this rod is going to run you about, I think, $50 or $60. So another good budget option. It's a moderate fast action on the rod, so it's kind of got, it bends kind of 2/3 up the blank, I would say, and it's got a little more flex. It's a good rod for treble hook baits, especially, but I consider it a pretty general purpose rod. It's a light power, and this is, if I want, this is like a 6.5 foot, 6'8". It's a 6'8" rod. So if I'm fishing, a slightly bigger system or something, I kind of tend to opt for this one because I can get a little more distance, a little more ability to kind of fight a bigger fish with this rod. And I actually have one more that I'm going to show you really quick. So this is the last rod I wanted to touch on. You can see it's actually a telescopic rod. And this is actually the first BFS rod that I bought. It's a pretty cheap rod. I'm just going to try to link it in the description. I don't actually know what it's called. It has no branding or anything on it. Like I said, cheap rod, about $30. And it has some issues. Getting the guides out and straight takes some practice. And they tend to get kind of knocked out of position easily here. I'm trying to get them set up right for you. And the other kind of weird thing about this is because of the telescopic nature of it, the spacing on the guides is kind of weird. They tend to be kind of clustered up near the tip. But it's a lightweight rod. It's got kind of that more traditional butt on it, so it's more like that bass fishing side of BFS in that way. But it's short. It's a 6-footer. I would call it a light action or light power. It's not the most sensitive. It does work, for the price. It's honestly, it's a pretty good value. I've taken this on trips, work trips, just, collapse it, put it in my suitcase. There's a little plastic cover you put over it to protect it. And yeah, I've caught a lot of fish on this thing. I've caught bass up to 3 pounds on it. So yeah, it does work. It's, if you're looking for a travel rod for bait finesse, I could say that this thing is halfway decent. So the next tip I want to touch on, guys, has to do with casting one of these setups. What I mean by that is that, I think, in my opinion, casting one of these, especially one of these smaller rods, with a shorter grip, the stroke, the casting stroke that I feel like I use with it is a little bit different from a traditional bait caster. And you can, if you want to get some distance, you can. I do sometimes do an overhead cast like this. It tends to make your lure arc a lot in the air, If I'm in a smaller place, you know, a creek or a little pond or something, a lot of times I'm going to be doing my sidearm cast. Sometimes even these sort of backhanded casts like that, just with one hand, especially with this rod with the shorter butt. So keep that in mind, is that, you know, you're not going to be hurling this thing out there, you know, really hard. You're launching it 60, you know, yards out into the lake most of the time. If you do, you'll probably take all the line off your spool, because, you know, these spools don't hold a lot of line. Let your rod do the work for you. I mean, I think that's important with a bait caster anyway, in general, but especially with this, you really don't want to use a lot of power at all behind that cast. You're not boring this thing out there. Just, you know, let that rod load up, let your lure put that flex in your rod, and just, you know, do a smooth motion, a smooth casting motion, and that's going to get you the best results. You know, you're not going to get a lot of backlashes. You know, you just want to be gentle, be finesse. You don't want to be out here ripping your cast out there. You're almost always going to blow up your spool with these really low inertia, lightweight spools. So before we move on, I want to touch on the line that I use. I've used mono, actually, for my BFS fishing. Pretty much exclusively, I've used a 6.6 pound mono, and what I use the most is actually a 7 pound mono. And I'm going to link the brand of the line in the description. It's not a super expensive line or anything like that, but it's, you know, fairly small diameter, 7 pound test mono. I like that strength level. You know, it's not, for me, I feel like 6 is like a little bit on the weaker side. It feels like 7 is just kind of just right. You know, when you hit 8, you know, at that point the diameter of your line is higher and you can't hold as much of it. So I feel like that 7, it just strikes a good balance between, you know, lightness and the thinness of the line. So that's what I use. You know, some people say that you should use braid only, and if you use mono, you're going to mess up your spool. Your spool's going to warp, like somehow, like if you're under tension, that somehow the mono line can stretch enough to damage your spool. I don't know if that's true at all, guys. I've heard people say that. I can't say I've ever done that with any of my spools. I mean, I guess, you know, be careful. They are small, you know, they are lightweight spools, so I mean, you know, don't roughhouse with them, but I've never seen that be an issue. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of researching. So the next thing I want to touch on here is, you know, the baits and the lures that are typically kind of used in BFS. And to be honest, it's kind of a broad subject, so I'm not going to try to go into too much detail, but it is one of those areas where you can find a lot of specialty BFS gear. You know, a lot of lures that are marketed for bait finesse. You know, smaller, they tend to be downsized versions of things. You know, smaller. Often it's jerk baits. You know, a sinking jerk bait is probably the most traditional BFS lure that you can use, especially for trout. So hard baits are big. You know, jerk baits, suspending, floating, sinking, all of them. I use suspending and floating mostly, but you can spend a lot of money on BFS lures if you want to. Now, but you definitely don't have to. You can definitely just go with what you would throw on your spinning stuff. You know, anything, really, anything under, you know, 1/4 ounce or less is kind of my benchmark. I got, you know, some spinners here. This is an inline spinner that I made. Perfect little BFS lure. You know, you can be so efficient with the spinner, just making, you know, tons of casts. You know, you can just be very, very efficient, cover a lot of water, present that lure so many times, you get a lot of bites. It's a classic multi-species option, which is what I try to kind of go for with BFS a lot of the time. Little top water hard baits. This is the Rebel teeny pop bar. It's an 1/8 of an ounce little popper. Great option. I got this tiny pre-rig swim bait. This is on the smaller end for BFS, but really, the lower end for me is around a 1/16 of an ounce. Here's another lure that I built in this topwater buzzbait, this inline buzzbait. This was in my top lures of the year video, top lures of 2024 video, and these are now also on my lure store website. I'll link that in the description of the video if you want to check them out. Same with the spinners. I just uploaded a bunch of new lures to the shop, including that the buzzbait and some more spinners. So definitely encourage you to check that out. It's a way to support the channel, and I have a ton of confidence in the lures, and there's plenty of videos of me catching fish with them. Little crappie baits are another great option. Really any style that you want. This is a little straight tail. It's a Bobby Garland. No, it's a Mr. Crappie shad pole. You know, choose your jig head, right? 16th ounce. Like I said, that's kind of the lightest I go. An 8th ounce. You can call them an 8th ounce jig head on one of these setups. That's what I have actually on this. Just a little curly tail on an 8th ounce jig head. That's just a classic beginner lure, and it's perfect for BFS fishing, guys. You don't have to overcomplicate this with, you know, miniature glide baits or you know, something fancy like that. Like, I mean, you can, obviously you can, if that's how you want to go with it, but you can keep it cheap, keep it simple. Little crankbaits, guys, is another awesome option. This is like a Bass Pro Shops, I think, but you know, these tiny cranks, kind of in that little weight range, you know, 3/32 of an ounce, 1/10 of an ounce. See, I also picked out a little spinnerbait here. This is an H&H single spin, 1/16 of an ounce. This is like the miniature version. They have full size ones as well. You know, a double hook on this. This is a very old-fashioned spinnerbait, but it's still, and it, you know, looks kind of basic, but it catches a ton of fish, guys. And yeah, back to those jerk baits. Here's one. This is a Eurotackle Z-Spender. I fished with this this past year. Caught a couple of fish on it. Still kind of learning these suspending jerk baits. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. That's all I really wanted to touch on with getting started with BFS. I think this is, this video should be a good kind of guideline for you if you're kind of looking into this. Really the main thing to remember, you know, when you're looking for gear, you know, be willing to kind of go outside of maybe where you traditionally pick up your gear. You know, there's some specialty shops for BFS. There's also way more options if you're willing to order things from overseas. So keep that in mind as well. BFS is much more popular in other parts of the world, but it's definitely growing here. It's a phenomenon here in the US now, I can say that for sure. I've watched some YouTubers who used to just fish with spinning gear. Suddenly they're into BFS. So it's definitely a growing method of fishing, sport fishing. So with that being said, thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned something about how to get started with BFS equipment. And stay tuned for more videos over the winter, guys. I'm going to try to, you know, even though I won't go out and fish that much, you know, I've still got some older footage to edit, and I'm going to try to do more videos like this, you know, where I'm sitting down talking about different aspects of my type of fishing. Yeah, looking forward to those first few days of spring and getting back out there. Thanks for watching.